In my mindset, you can do an entire session of world building without ever having an idea yourself. Let's do a little experiment. Hello there and welcome to our world building series. In this episode, we'll be talking about creating and connecting ideas, and we'll also talk about defining the idea for our own world build. Alright, so if you're new to our world building series, in the last episode we talked about the big overarching methods of world building, and in this episode we'll really go into the detail of generating those ideas and so on. Alright, so let's start off by separating the idea from the ideas. So the idea is sort of the overarching concept for your world, the theme, the uniqueness, the defining quality of your world, the thing that you might pitch to someone else, you know, the sort of an elevator pitch, if you're familiar with that. If you only had a couple of sentences to describe your world, what would you describe? That's sort of the idea of your world. The ideas in plural are the concepts, the characters, the systems, the places that you come up with and throw at your world build to fill it with intrigue and excitement. It's what's going to end up making your actual world build. But already here I want to draw a clear line in the sand. The ideas of our world build does not equal our world build. The ideas are the things we find intriguing and exciting. They're the things that a friend suggested, something we read or saw, something we remembered from our childhood. These are ideas that we then try to put into our world build. But in doing so, we test it against the world's rules. Does it work? Does it play well with other things? How does it all connect? And these ideas might pass or fail or only enter the world in parts, but it's this process of testing your ideas against the rules of your world that helps bridge the gap. Comparing them to other ideas, bridging the gap, creating coherency and consistency is the mark of a good world builder. I believe great world building has strong rules for what they allow. I think it's why the audience immerse themselves in these worlds. They see clear rules, and then when characters defy the odds despite those rules, it feels exciting. In my opinion, ideas are the easy part. Later on I will show you how even random ideas can become something exciting through this process of comparisons. The real challenge here is mixing those ideas, comparing them to each other, relating, see how they connect. Ideas for what could be, what could happen, and who could do it, that's the easy part. In my opinion, it's 10 times more difficult to actually bridge those ideas, and that's actually the skill of the world builder. Now we could say that the outcome of comparing and connecting your ideas is just the result of good or bad ideas, but roughly speaking, I don't believe in bad or good ideas. I just believe in ideas that work well or less well with the given context of your world. And this idea could work really well in another situation, but not necessarily in your situation. In my mindset, you can do an entire session of world building without ever having an idea yourself. Let's do a little experiment. Imagine you're sitting in a room with 10 people. You're now going to ask these 10 people for ideas, or let's call them cues, for your world building. And your job is now to keep track of those ideas and connect them in interesting ways. Someone could now blurt out, "A tribe of blood magic trolls." And you would then take this idea and then write it down and make a mental note of it. Already this idea is pretty complex and lots of things could be done with it, but we don't really have any other ideas to challenge it yet, so we'll wait a little bit and see what happens. Maybe someone screams out a sunken city and someone else screams a cult of elven fire mages. So here we have two new ideas that we could use to compare against our first idea, the blood magic trolls, and we could keep adding things, but this is already more than enough to start comparing and potentially create some tension and maybe a system too. So what you might want to start doing here is compare the different ideas and see if there's any common references that spring to mind. So idea 1 and 2, there's not a lot of overlap here, but maybe the fact that trolls live under bridges and bridges usually go over water because it's a sunken city, or maybe the fact that they're blood trolls could relate to the idea of the Red Sea, because water and sea of blood. And to that extreme we can now imagine blood trolls that live underwater in a sea of blood. Or maybe trolls that sacrifice individuals near the water to do their blood magic and thereby creating a Red Sea of sorts. So here we can see how the two ideas can be connected and compared in different ways. And we didn't talk much about the sunken city, but that's okay. How you compare and kind of piece those pieces together is, you know, up to you. As the world builder, you have to pull those ideas apart and see how they connect and could relate. Now let us try the third idea, the fire mages. Now we might ask ourselves, how do the elves feel about the trolls? Well, stereotypically elves and trolls might not really get along. They seem to be quite opposites, and stereotypes are not always a bad thing. They appeal to something primal in us, and we can use it to actually guide the audience and then subvert their expectations later. But we do have this extra idea of the sunken city, and comparing that to the fire mages also becomes quite interesting, because they sort of represent opposites as well, fire and water. And this contrast of fire and water is potentially stronger than the contrast between trolls and elves. Iconically, but also stereotypically, fire and water are strong opposites, and potentially more memorable, but also maybe more dull. That's a decision for you to make. There's no right or wrong here, but let's roll with the fact that fire and water might be opposites in this scenario. Maybe this sunken city represents an underwater society, and maybe this society is quite powerful, and perhaps the blood magic trolls and the fire elves have to band together in their struggle against this powerful underwater society. And maybe here there's something quite interesting in the struggle of alliances between the blood magic trolls and the fire elves, because by nature they're very different and don't really like each other, but they have to come together in order to defend themselves or win over the underwater society. So potentially they'd have to learn to work together. Boom! There we have the idea. Maybe not the strongest idea, but there's something intriguing about it. It sparks the imagination. Now we could ask ourselves, why is the underwater society so powerful? What are they after? How will the blood trolls and the fire elves learn to work together? And these are the types of questions you constantly have to ask yourself to develop your world further. Now, these ideas could have gone in many different directions, and in the hands of someone else they would have, because we don't have the same points of references, and that's a good thing. The point I'm trying to make here is to not get too obsessed with having good ideas. Instead, think about how you can connect them. Don't get me wrong, sometimes a great concept or idea is just cool no matter what. Lightsabers are immensely cool in any context, but I do think they're more cool because of the way they relate to the Jedi and how the Jedi relate to the world of Star Wars. For me, this is the key to great world building. It's not your ideas or your friends' ideas that make or break your world, it's how those ideas are connected. Essentially, those 10 people sitting in a room blurting out ideas could have been a robot. In fact, they were. A while back I created a concept generator for creating fun and unlikely challenges, and I used this generator to generate the prompts and the cues that I just presented before. There's lots of these concept and idea generators out there, and I've often used them to create unique ideas and starting points for new worlds. So if you've never started a world before, you just want to give it a go, then I really recommend trying some of these idea generators out there and just, have fun with it. And if you already have a world build that you started, then I still think you should try out these generators and just throw some of the ideas at your world. The randomness that a friend or a generator provides are really great because they throw ideas at you that you wouldn't come up with in your own head. Often if you're just in your own head, it's difficult to come up with new ideas because the brain likes to walk in the same lanes because it's comfortable and easy, and it's very difficult to forge a new path in your brain if you don't have something from the outside. It's just how we're wired. And instead of a generator, you could totally use a friend or read something or go on Wikipedia and just start searching. There's many ways of generating these ideas. And I think a friend especially is a really good source of generating new worlds because they have that same ability as you to connect and relate the ideas in unique and interesting ways. Alright, back to the idea itself. At this point, I will usually readdress the idea. Basically, start from scratch, using those same initial cues. I find that if you force yourself to avoid something you've already made, then you might come up with something quite interesting and forge those new pathways. And it's pretty much 50-50 whether the first idea or the second idea is better or worse. So I always allow myself to do that in case I might miss out on something potentially even greater just using those same cues. Alright, I will take those same 3 ideas from before and try to interpret them differently somehow. So a cult of elven fire mages is a pretty defined idea, not a lot of ways to bend it, but blood magic trolls could maybe be interpreted differently. Maybe these trolls do not perform magic, maybe they were formed and created from the usage of blood magic. Maybe there's a cult of blood magic elves in the same way there's a cult of elven fire mages. And then we have this sunken city. Perhaps it was the homestead of another cult, an ancient cult of magic wielders. Alright, so we seem to have a lot of cult things going on, and so I'll try to think about cults on their own. When I think of cults, I think of indoctrination and sort of systems and enclosure and cut off from society, but also a connection quite often to a strange deity or a non-mainstream deity. And at least when I think about it, I think of a dark deity, which would fit pretty well with these blood magic troll-making elves. Something that also came to mind is that cults quite often put special emphasis on special or magical items or symbols of being in the cult, like a tattoo or a ring. Perhaps these fire mages draw their power from magic rings that are connected to the cult and some dark god. Right now I'm still adding and trying to give substance to the world, but I don't really have the idea yet. So I'll have to create some sort of conflict maybe to introduce some of that. Well, if we have these magical rings of fire, then perhaps one of them is missing and it's got into the hands of someone who shouldn't have it. This all sounds a little bit familiar, but let's keep going. Maybe it's gotten into the hands of whoever is creating these trolls. Maybe there's also an artifact or a ring for creating trolls, and now that they have the ring of fire, they can create dragons, because dragons breathe fire, and maybe it's a form of troll or something like that. So perhaps there's a conflict between these fire mages and this troll dragon creator. And we also still have this sunken city to think about, so maybe it houses some ancient magical item that can do something different. At this point we have two sort of ideas, and I do like the themes and conflicts of the first idea a bit more, but I do like the visuals and especially this idea of magical artifacts from the second idea. So we could go with either of these ideas in separate parts, but we could also just steal a bit from each of them and combine them. Alright, I've gone ahead and done a few more iterations of what we talked about using those same ideas that we already established, and this idea is what we'll be moving forward with. Long ago, powerful artifacts were forged by the gods. Some of these artifacts helped the gods shape the world, and others were used as weapons for struggles amongst themselves. With time, these artifacts arrived into the world of mortals. The Citadel wields the Lightbringers, powerful artifacts of light, and tools of peacekeeping. In the eyes of the Citadel, an especially dangerous foe to keep at bay are the Warlocks of Fire, as they spread and conquer like wildfire. The Warlocks, however, see themselves as destroyers of oppression and freeing the world from chains of light. But now a darker foe has emerged, and it brings with it an army, not of soldiers, but of blood trolls and misfits. Pressured by this, the Citadel has now reached out to the Warlocks of Fire and asked for their alliance against this new threat. However, what the Citadel neglects to tell their new fiery allies is that the Lightbringers have lost their power. If the Warlocks were to learn of this, they would perhaps seize the chance, attack, and potentially vanquish the Citadel instead of this new foe. So yeah, this is not the greatest idea yet, but it will be our starting point, and hopefully you can see how I had to go between story and world building back and forth to come to the point where we are. And following the thread, you can maybe see how those initial three ideas became this idea through several iterations of comparing and connecting. And I've already begun to sketch and draw out some of these characters, and definitely drawing some of these things helped me decide on which way to go, because there was this imagery involved, and that's just an example of the saw method that we described in the last episode. Now, in the nature of world building, all these things can change and evolve, and they should. That's the whole point. And to be honest, I'm pretty excited to see where we go next. So that is it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. And as always, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.